Hey everyone, my name is Candace. Thank you for coming to my podcast. It's me time. This is about you. Tonight we're going to be talking about the journey and self discovery to self forgiveness from survival and victimhood. I've covered those topics on a couple different episodes before, and if you haven't already, check them out. I highly suggest you do so because they all correlate into what we're talking about tonight. So, self forgiveness for me hasn't always been easy. It started out as a child. Self forgiveness became a survival mechanism, I found. And with that being said, it really set me up for a distorted image of what forgiveness is actually. It changed my beliefs, and growing up with that and how that developed into my life is what we're going to talk about tonight. So without any further ado, let's just get into it. So growing up in my life, I had a trauma happen to me at a very young age. And when that happened, I felt very alone and very scared and very unsure of what to do next. I did know only pretty much one thing, and that was that I didn't want to live in my body. I didn't know how to live in my body. I didn't know how to stop hurting from the things that had been done to my body. I didn't necessarily want my body to stop hurting because I felt like I deserved the pain somehow. And trauma really gave me a distorted image of what self love looked like. And it's taken me a really long time to understand how forgiveness truly works. And so, going back to my experiences when I was younger, I felt like I had to forgive people around me so that things would be okay, if that makes sense. So, my first unhealthy forgiveness coping mechanisms were like, I'll forgive you because like it's not as bad as it could be, or I'll forgive the person that did the worst thing to me because I have to get through this somehow. And to me, back then, especially being at such a young age, trying to wrap my head around like how could I even think about forgiveness for this person? Why would I want to forgive them for what they've done? Like it was so confusing to me. And I remember thinking that like I learned forgiveness out of survival, and that really carried with me throughout my years and played out into my life in different ways that I didn't recognize or realize until later on in life. And a few examples of that are like um, forgiving boyfriends over the years for doing things that aren't necessarily as bad as what I've experienced because I know it could be worse. And forgiving people that have wronged me. But then I would also hold so many grudges against people that necessarily had a justified reason to be upset with me because I had been conducting myself in a less than favorable manner. And I didn't understand how forgiveness worked. And so, and I thought too at the time in some way that if I had forgiven them, that it would go away. And when it didn't, I found myself in this state of like resentment, and I had less than desirable self-worth for myself, as well as my confidence and my ability to self-express healthily with any coping skills that I had yet to learn, any healthy ones, was a really confusing place. And that's kind of where I want to talk about coming from today, because forgiveness showed up in my life. True forgiveness showed up when I started learning to love myself, when I started to look at my shadow work and the things that I had gone through and understanding not that I deserved what happened, but trying to understand from a human perspective where they came from because they were hurt. The people that hurt me were hurt people. And because hurt people, I didn't know how to handle that because I was hurt. I didn't understand that hurt people hurt people. And it took me really hurting myself because other people hurt me to even grasp that, like, their stuff matters too. And it took a lot of self-reflection and self-love. And, like, let me explain what that looked like for me. It looked like not drinking. It looked like putting down bad habits and putting down bad relationships and putting down toxic people and deciding to take my energy back and place it where it matters. And, like, whether that was just trying to stay alive or thriving, I recognize that I have a choice. And that choice was to fight myself in this body until I die, or learn to love myself around the grief of who I could have been if not for them. And because I was gifted with the ability of desperation, not the ability, I was gifted with desperation and rock bottom, and the people that I would have relied on to enable me didn't tolerate it. And the ones that did, I was so happy to during that happened, or during things that were going on, but it turns out that they were actually causing me more harm. But because growing up and living in trauma is so mind altering, I thought that I required those mind altering substances. And, like, the access to negativity, to self pity, to victimhood, to staying in survival mode, the access to all of that stuff was through my trauma. And so I was left at a place of, what do I do about myself? I don't want these mind altering problems anymore. I don't want this physical problem anymore. I don't want to be in this body. I don't want my future. I don't. But then I had to recognize, what am I willing to do? What am I willing to take a look at? What do I want? Because if I'm in such a state of I don't, and just pushing everybody and everything away, unless you're going to help me harm myself, I had to compromise within myself and come to a place of, I call it a compromise because I wasn't willing at the time to make peace with myself. I compromised with recovery. It was just like, hey, I'm going to just stay sober for today. I compromised with everything, with food. Okay, I will eat a nutritious meal today. I compromise with men. I'm not going out with that guy. He is not good for me. I compromised with everything, with junk food. I loved junk food, especially when I quit drinking. I had a sweets problem because I had been ingesting so much sugar because of the alcohol, that when I stopped drinking, my body still needed the sugar because I couldn't detox off of everything at once. Like, I compromised with keeping cigarettes, and, like, just all these compromises that I had reluctantly agreed to within myself, knowing that in the long term it would help me create a better life for myself, even though I didn't want to be alive. And so it was that compromise within myself that is just like, okay, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this, because there's so many things that are healthy that I didn't want to do. I made myself not want to do some of the unhealthy stuff too. That gave me a space to self-observe and reflect and think about what I do want. What am I willing to put into this? Because before I realize that I'm going to get out of life what I put into it, I just wanted the easy route. And today is a very different story. I understand that the easy thing and the right thing are not the same. But back then, please understand that I wanted the easy thing because cutting myself wasn't doing it for me anymore. And starving myself wasn't. And pushing away friends and family and people that I loved and cared about, it wasn't working because I wasn't getting anything out of it that was helping me. And so I had to go to the hospital. I had to take a pause. I had to save my own existence through humility and recognizing that if I can put my emotions aside honorably and recognize that the people that hurt me are hurt, then that gave me the freedom to realize that I'm that's something that we have in common, that I'm hurt too. And it's such a strange, foreign, uncomfortable, unsocially acceptable place to be when in that kind of space of self-forgiveness. Because as I said, when I was a child, forgiveness started out as, for me, as a survival strategy. And I guess up until this point, it kind of presented itself in that same kind of way. Because if I was to survive, I need to forgive. And I need to forgive myself. Because I can't forgive anybody else unless I find peace within myself. Because if I carry that hurt that other people gave me and tell myself and others that I'm practicing forgiveness, I'm going to manifest that hurt and pain inside of me continuously. And I'm going to continuously, subconsciously or consciously, hurt people because I can't forgive other people if I don't forgive myself. And that goes for everything. Forgiving myself as from like, why didn't I scream louder? Well, why didn't this happen? Well, why didn't this happen? Well, why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? Like, it doesn't matter as much as it does matter today in this present moment when I'm practicing self-forgiveness, and these feelings that are so real to me are bursting out of my skin to the point of I don't know how to handle it. But that's just it. Is I started to practice detachment from my emotions. And that was one of the pivotal points in my self-forgiveness journey, because once I learned that I am not my trauma, things changed. It allowed me space to separate myself from the guilt and separate myself from the shame and separate myself from the harm that I thought that I needed to inflict on myself. It gave me a breath of grace, and I had been so desperate for that gas, I didn't even know it at the time. And, I didn't realize how much of my humanness was being affected by spiritual things, because I am a spiritual being having a human experience. And when I was self-loathing and after all of those things happening, I remember thinking that like there's no way that there's anything spiritual going on here. It's just this, it's just that, and it's just the way that it is. And it took, that hard look inside of myself about recognizing like what can I change, what can I do for myself to make myself a better human being, because at the end of the day I may not be as bad or have done the same things as other people have in my life that I've experienced, but I was still conducting myself in a way that I didn't know how to live, though I kept waking up every morning. And so, learning to take those bite-sized pieces of practicing how to cope, how to make a meal, learning what I like and what I don't like, where my boundaries lie, what will I put up with, what won't I put up with. Like, it all took so much time and intention, because I was at such a blank slate of like not knowing anything before. And that's what I want to really talk about today, is the meat and potatoes about how self forgiveness has impacted my life. Because when I didn't forgive myself, it impacted my life. And when I started learning to, it also impacted my life. And today, I can sit here and talk about self forgiveness in a way that comes at it from the perspective of love, because we all just want to be loved. I just wanted to be loved. That was a huge rebellion piece inside of me for a lot of years, was that I just wanted to feel love. I just wanted to be loved, and I just didn't want to hurt anymore. And I think that that's kind of part of the human condition, is that we all just want to be loved. And when we don't feel that love, it manifests itself into monstrous ways, and we end up hurting each other. And it's not fair, it's not right, but it is what it is, because that's how it works. And so I'm a little bit stubborn, and I don't accept that it is what it is when it comes to that. And so I found the more that I took my energy back, I started using those emotions that I was feeling inside and placing discipline around them. I'm not going to self harm. I will not drink. I will not act out with this person. I will not people please with this person. I will not do what doesn't serve my highest um, goal. And that changed a lot of things for me, because I was left with, again, like, what can I do? Well, I can do this. I can make new friends. I can learn to have hard conversations with people. I can learn to own my stuff. I can learn to take accountability for my stuff. I can learn to show up for people when I say that I'm going to be there. I can do things. I can show up for myself, even if it's just in ways that are invisible to other people. Because for the first long while of my healing journey, it was a lot of like invisible wins, I call them, that nobody else could see, but I knew that they were there, because I knew that I had changed my behavior in small but subtle ways, and that they would be compounding, because they were compounding within me, and that creates change, and that created the momentum that and the drive that I really needed to be able to see my life from a really much kind of like bird's eye view kind of perspective. Like, I was able to look and yeah, come up with different consequences that I wanted for myself. And consequences don't have to be bad. I just mean like different outcomes is what I wanted. And things were really uncomfortable at first, because I had never done any of this stuff before. And things were really weird, and things aren't pretty. And there's a lot of feelings attached to learning who I was. But I just wanted to share that, because those depths of like despair and grieving who I could have been, and like grieving the loss of letting go of the idea that they'll ever receive punishment in my eyes at that time is what I saw. And there's a lot of grief that accumulated over life, and I don't know if you can relate to this or not, but it's not an easy thing to live with self, clear headed, without distractions, without anything. But those changes started compiling in my life to different outcomes. And as rocky as things were, and as many lessons as I had to learn the hard way, I'm so grateful for that because it did lead me to where I am today. And self forgiveness has been one of the most powerful, freeing, absolutely life changing roads that I've walked this far. It's been absolutely beautiful at times. It's been just mind blowingly like the sunrise, you know what I mean? It's just been so glorious in moments. But I also understand the darkness of night that it takes to see that. And that's where my own personal opinion, I think that people that have experienced traumas like this and that we heal through them, like, we're gifted such a superpower. We are gifted the power of inner strength and of survival and of living through what other people aren't supposed to live through. That is the definition of being a survivor. And I I'm alive today, and I never thought that I would be this old. But here I am today, sitting here talking to you about self-forgiveness, because self-forgiveness has not only like allowed me freedom from my past, it's allowed me to free my children, my future generations. It's allowed me to free my past ancestry line. It has allowed me to create a space in which other people can heal or even take a look at themselves. There has been so many things that I have gotten out of self-forgiveness that I didn't even expect. And there's a lot to be said about that as well with the trajectory of my life. Um, but in recognizing that my abuser is a human was a big part of the first step for me. And although I didn't have to like it, it's the truth. Hurt people. And it's up to me where I want to draw the line for that in my family, just like it's up to you whether you want to draw the line for that in your family. And you can do it. You can do it, because if I can, you can. And the only reason that I could was because I reached out for help, and I took the help, and I took the suggestions, and in a less than perfect way, I forged my own path to be sitting here in front of you today to be talking about this. So I'm just really grateful to you for you tuning in and listening to this. I'm hoping that this helps somebody, and I'm gonna take 24 and pass it along. Thank you all for watching.